So if you didn't read the weekly email this week, that is the pop-up choir, and you too can join. So here is our world. Beautiful and terrible things will happen. Keep our hearts tender and our eyes soft and our words true. Because this is what we are about. We know there is no answer but to love one another. We bear witness against unnecessary destruction. We gather in community to practice being the person we say we want to be. We cannot do everything, but we can do something, and that something is not nothing. So ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything, and say it with me. That is how the light gets in. So these past few weeks, as we look ahead to Thursday's holiday, Nathan and I have been wrestling together with how to make meaning of the Thanksgiving holiday, as we each learn more about the truth and what happened afterwards. And we learn more about the experience of Indigenous peoples today. We've been thinking about how we might push ourselves to get a little uncomfortable, because sometimes that feeling of discomfort is really the feeling of growth, and how we might hold a little more complexity and broaden our understanding of what this holiday means to different groups of people. So this morning for our sermon, Nathan and I will be asking each other some questions about our feelings and experiences of grappling with the stories and histories of Thanksgiving. And I trust that as a community, we have the spiritual muscles to maybe feel a little uncomfortable in the service of growing. Right, friends? And that we also have the spiritual capacity to hold multiple truths and to lean into wrestling with complexity. Do you think we can do that? I do too. Nathan says, I don't know. All right, let's go. So first off, Nathan, why did we title this sermon, A Spirituality for Thanksgiving?
So I was struggling with a title. I always struggle with title. And I was working out in my basement last Monday, and I was like, what are we going to do with this service? I've been thinking about it for like a month or two, and nothing was like coming together. And I was in the middle of like an interval, and I was like, I think I got it. You know, like, you know how an idea, then you like come back to it, like, was that a really good idea or not? Ever that happened to you? So anyway, I had this title, The Spirituality of Thanksgiving. The spirituality is an overused word. It is used for so much that I actually don't know what it means anymore, right? But here's, when I think about the word, here's what I mean. You've heard me describe some of this. So first of all, etymology coming. We ready for etymology? Okay. It's actually just Hebrew. The word spirit comes from the Hebrew word meaning ruah. So you might think of it as ruahality. I want to ask you to say it with me because it's kind of hard to enunciate. All that ruah means, literally, in the Hebrew Bible is wind. It means wind. Like the opening part of Genesis, a movement across the water, a wind across the water, a spirit across the water. It also means breath. That's what spirit means. So there's breath moving between us. There's wind moving across us. It's windy this morning. Ruah across the land. And to say that we get inspired, which is another overused word, right? Oh, so inspirational. To say that we're inspired means that we draw in breath. We draw in spirit. The ruah of others. Bad news, this is why we have viruses. Good news, the good news is that we don't need to rely on ourselves, on just ourselves, to come to life. In low times, and I've had plenty of them, we draw on one another for hope. In lean times, when we're tired of hearing our own ideas rattle around in our head, we draw on the experience and the wisdom of the people we love, our friends. Like, what should I do about this job? What should I do about this parenting challenge? What should I do about this parent? In silent times, we draw on each other's music. Sarah is so patient with me as I learn how to sing and discover my voice. And on Thanksgiving, when our world has gotten too small, my world has gotten so small sometimes, our life is too narrow, and we take things for granted, we draw in family and friends. Even maybe in spite of how complicated our families and friend groups can be. Because no matter how extroverted or introverted you are, everybody, we are all designed for relationship. I don't care who you are. But over the last couple of years, I've started to learn new things about the Ruah, or the Spirit, that moves across the land that is just actually this hilltop right here. This space that since 1826, this building has stood here. And then prior to that, 2 other buildings since 1685. Those 2 other buildings burned in fires. Right here, right exactly here. And before that, of course, there were people for whom this was home, right here. People who fought, who cried, who loved, who got married, who danced, who sang, pop-up choirs, who married, who had children, and who died. Right here. And I've begun to learn their names. So, Nipmunk, say with me. Punkapoag. Wampanoag. And of course, the praying Indians of Natick. And here's the thing, I have given 19 sermons before Thanksgiving here, right here. Hoping to inspire us together. And never once until now have I said their names. Why is that? Shouldn't I, as one of your ministers, if I'm honest, ask myself to draw in their spirit too? To be inspired by their spirit, to draw in their Ruah too? Their stories? So that a spirituality of Thanksgiving is not just one of gathering the family that Tim and Sarah and that we sang so beautifully, one of my favorite songs, or about grace and gratitude, or about the Mary Chapin song, Chapin Carpenter song that we just sang. So that it's not only just about grace and gratitude and battling birds and tofu in ovens, which I will do on Wednesday, but I also want to be a person of integrity. And all the word integrity means, another overused word, is to be integrated, to be whole, to be whole. And I'm just learning, you guys, at the ripe old age of almost 51. I'm just learning. Even if, is this true for you? I sometimes don't want to. So, Heather, help me learn.
That wasn't a question, Nathan. So, like many of us, I grew up cutting out construction paper buckle hats and cornucopias in elementary school, and hearing the stories of the Pilgrims and Indians, the same Wampanoag nation that inhabited this land too, having a pleasant meal to celebrate their cooperation and friendship in Plymouth in 1621. And then the story ends there. So I grew up in Massachusetts, and all of my ancestors, I was telling Nathan this morning, all of my ancestors on both sides have been in Massachusetts since they arrived in this country. And mostly they were working class Irish folks arriving here in the early 20th century. As my mom said yesterday, most of them were Irish criminals, but she confirmed for me yesterday, this Thanksgiving story is more personal than I had realized, that the offhand comment that I once heard my grandfather make was true, that one of my ancestors did arrive on the Mayflower in 1620, and was therefore, I assume, part of the first Thanksgiving. And growing up here on this land where the story took place, and with an ancestry I did not know that I had, when she told me this yesterday, I was like, oh no, I gotta change my sermon. I never wondered why the story ended with that meal, and why I wasn't aware of Indigenous peoples living today. I didn't know until this week that there are 2 federally recognized tribes in Massachusetts. I never asked what happened after the first Thanksgiving. The story for me somehow just ended. Several centuries peacefully passed, and Indigenous people somehow quietly disappeared from the story. Did any of you grow up with this story? I noted even in the children's book that I found this year for our Wonder Box, which came out just this year and was written by an Indigenous author. I have been looking for a story like this told from the Wampanoag perspective for years, but I noticed that this story ends there too. It alludes to the meal changing their lives forever. It alludes to the day of mourning, but it doesn't tell what happens afterwards. And it doesn't tell that story, I think, because after the story that we tell children ends, the real story gets incredibly violent. It is difficult to stomach, and it is incredibly uncomfortable. Even before that first Thanksgiving in 1621, settler colonialism had been wreaking havoc on Indigenous peoples all across North America since 1492. Indigenous peoples were captured and brought to Europe and sold as slaves. In an effort to subdue and control Indigenous tribes, settlers burned the crops and food supplies of Indigenous tribes right before the harvest, starving entire tribes through the winter. There were massacres, which, because the Indigenous peoples knew the land so well and the settlers were unable to track them, they were often planned attacks disguised as peace negotiations, which then ended violently. The writings from early settlers with names that we recognize, like John Winthrop, Cotton Mathers, Roger Williams, these writings demonstrate premeditation, manipulation, dehumanization, and greed. In just a few generations, 10% of the Indigenous population in North America were killed by massacres and diseases brought from Europe. And we know that the horrors continued as settler colonialism expanded westward. Friends, the word for what happened to Indigenous people in this country is genocide. And it's no wonder that Indigenous people refer to this holiday that most Americans call Thanksgiving as a day of mourning. Thanksgiving was celebrated in this country on and off since 1789, after a proclamation from George Washington. Yet it wasn't until 1863 that Abraham Lincoln proclaimed a national day of Thanksgiving, calling on American people to heal the wounds of a nation in a time of deep polarization and division in the midst of the Civil War. And friends, I want to be very clear. I had to learn and relearn this on my own, and some of it this week, because I was not taught any of this, and that is not an accident. So Nathan, I'm curious, how does knowing more about the history and the origins of the Thanksgiving story make you feel?
I probably feel like all of you feel, right? Which is like horrible. Thanksgiving is my favorite holiday. And that's for all kinds of personal family reasons that I know that you have too, maybe, that are rooted in practices like getting dressed up in pleated khaki pants and classic brown Sperry loafers with the I don't know what that stuff, like the little bow that would never, the laces that would never stay, yeah, whatever that's called, and an Izod button-down shirt that we had to tuck in. And I would go to my mom's side of my mom's side of the family, the preppy side, on Thanksgiving with all the thousands of cousins who took the Catholic decree to multiply very seriously. That whole clan loving me like families do through all my pimply, awkward, self-conscious teen years. I still have some of that. My coming home from college, like too cool for you guys. That era. And then I went overseas for Peace Corps for 2 years. They called me and they passed around the phone so I could talk to everybody, which wasn't a phone at all. It was like a lifeline for me. And later, after seminary, my uncle asked me to do the prayer before dinner was served. He asking me, "Are you like a priest now?" And I'm like, Before I started the prayer by invoking the Spirit of life rather than Heavenly Father. And nobody rolled their eyes. Maybe because their eyes were closed. But it meant the world to me. It meant the world to me to be asked to do that. Which is what I think about. We just picked our daughter up from college yesterday, and our son's coming home tomorrow night. Home for the holidays, right? Home for the holidays. I want to remake that welcome that I felt. This welcome home. No matter where you've been in your life, you're home. Thanksgiving is like this annual version, retelling, for those of you that know your Bible stories, of the prodigal son. It's the prodigal return every time, no matter where you've been. So now, Heather, I've been reading the news in Florida. They're trying to make these anti-woke laws that would basically prevent us from hearing what Heather just described, because it would maybe offend me enough to not, or offend you in memories that I have. Make me feel so guilty that I can't feel love and affection for this holiday. So, can't two realities be true? Right? Can't all my holidays and all your feelings about the holiday be true? They are true. They're real. You have them. I have them. And isn't it also true that I didn't hear any of that history for all kinds of reasons related to the color of my skin and where I grew up and the era that I grew up in? So, Heather, here's the question that I have. If you were here last week, I'll summarize. I had a battle to find a turkey in time for Thursday because, anyway, we have surprise guests. So I had to battle for a turkey. And my question, Heather, is, can I still have Thanksgiving? Because I just finally found a turkey at Outpost Farm in Holliston.
Nathan, I'm sorry, you have to call the farm back and cancel that 10-pounder. But if you're looking for a 10-pounder, I hear that Post Farm in Holliston, is that what you said, is going to have one. I'm kidding. Of course you can have Thanksgiving. I was reflecting with you, Nathan, earlier this week that even though I personally have known about the Day of Mourning since college, and I've been politically aligned with it in many ways, and I have only ever lived an hour away from Plymouth, it's notable to me that I have never gone. I've considered going on several years, and each time I've elected to join my family because it feels like too precious of an opportunity to miss, and I am also quite susceptible to FOMO, which is an acronym that means fear of missing out. And I know that seeing the social media posts roll in at the end of the day and other people's posts about idyllic holiday meals would just make me feel isolated and lonely. Which, let's be honest, social media is very good at doing that in general, but it can be heightened during holidays when our own experience is perhaps not what we would have preferred or what we're seeing other people have. Anyway, to answer your question, Nathan, yes, you can still have Thanksgiving. Gratitude is always an important practice, and time to gather with loved ones over a meal feeds our spirits. So I instead invite all of us, myself and all of us, to bring the stories and the complexities to the table, literally and figuratively. Let's not tell ourselves that it's only about gratitude now, or it doesn't mean that anymore, and ignore the fact that this holiday, the history of this holiday, is rooted in colonialism and tells the story of a meal that changed the course of history and had devastating effects on Indigenous people. Because one of the things I think we can do in places like our church is to wrestle with complexity and to ask ourselves hard questions like, what do I do with the knowledge that one of my ancestors was on the Mayflower? I don't know the answer to that question. And whether or not we had literal ancestors who were early settler colonialists in this country, what do we do with the legacies that we have inherited, both good and bad? How do we make sense of holidays that might have deep personal meaning but difficult origin stories? What truth-telling does love ask us to do? And then what does love call us to do from there? Nathan, what about you? What are you asking of yourself and of others on this Thanksgiving?
So as we finish up, friends, my answer to that is that I'm working on it. I'm working on it. Are you working on it? And what that means for me is to be curious. To just love that word, being curious. Holidays like Thanksgiving are loaded with traditions, and they come from all things having to do with our culture, the part of the country we grew up in, the Midwest for me, the things our family did, who our people are. Like, the Friday after Thanksgiving for me was when we went to my grandmother's side because she was a nurse in a veteran hospital in St. Louis County, and she worked on Thursdays. That was the unpreppy side where you couldn't tuck your shirt in. They'd like rip it out if you did. She would make bundt cake and that casserole I talked about last week with frosted flakes and sweet potatoes and marshmallows. It's actually awesome. We have had such a time of being unsettled over these years, disrupted and lost, and especially if you've lost somebody this year. Traditions keep us rooted, don't they, and grounded and connected. They call us back home. They call us back to ourselves, back to this one wild life that we have that we should never take for granted. But here's what curiosity means for me. I think it means that I can't only stay in my space of traditions, of what was done before. I need to learn about the story that Heather described and that we heard about so that I'm not defensive, right? So I just don't want to go, la, 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 la. Because I want to grow. And the thing about growing, especially for our daughter, she would wake up in the middle of the night and she said, my legs hurt. Growing pains, right? Growing isn't easy. Neither is growing a soul. Neither is growing our perspective. So what I'm going to do in the middle of helping make our meal on Thursday is that this week, I'm going to sort of, and there's websites you can go to. I'm going to plug in where I live, 83 Winthrop Street, Holliston, Massachusetts, 01746. And in addition to the opening the can of the cranberries that my grandmother also always offered, and burning rolls and trying not to wreck the turkey that I fought so hard for, I'm just going to learn a little bit about who the people were before I was there, long before. That's what I'm asking myself to do. I don't know where these questions are going to lead. I don't know what it's going to feel like, but it's a start. And that's all I'm asking of you. We all have to start somewhere because all of you are somewhere. You're in your own life, where you are. We're all in different places, everybody. We've all got like weird, complex stories, what I call a casserole of complexity, which is us. And that's okay. The point is that life calls us on, which we're going to sing, which we're like literally out of time. I just want you to lean in with me. I want you to be curious with me. I want us to listen. I want to grow. I want to hear the Ruah. It's across this land that I maybe haven't paid attention to before. Here is the world. Beautiful things happen. Terrible things happen. Terrible things have happened. And so we just have to keep our hearts tender, right? We just have to keep our eyes and ears open. We have to have curiosity. And for me, I have to have prayers at Thanksgiving table that are true. That are true.